Welcome to Brains, Bibles, and Beyond, where we discuss theology and worldview apologetics. I'm Nate Day with Think Like Christ Ministries, and I'm here with our resident theologian Joel Willoughby with Brains and Bibles.
If you would like more information about our ministries, check out our websites, brainsandbibles.com and thinklikechrist.org. And on whatever platform you are using, please like, share, subscribe, do whatever else you know you should do to help us out.
If you have any questions, send them to podcast@thinklikechrist.org.
And all you budding theologians out there, go grab your favorite theological coffee receptacle and enjoy this episode.
Welcome back, everybody. And this is Brains, Bibles, and Beyond. And today we're going to have a guest with us. And Joel, why don't you introduce our guest?
Oh, this is Mark Ward. I had the privilege of meeting him when I was at a conference and exhibiting there. It was actually kind of a funny story. I saw him, I knew him from his YouTube channel. I should check that out. Just look at Mark Ward, and you'll see it. He has an awesome channel.
Yes, definitely.
He has a wonderful, gentle, kind approach to teaching. Very stimulating information. And so, anyways, I've seen him on that before. I saw him at a conference. And I thought, I want to go talk to this guy. And he's talking to someone else. I was just kind of trying to wait my turn. I'm lurking in the shadows. And then I heard him say something about being in Mount Vernon. And I got excited because we're literally, Nate and I here are in Mount Vernon right now.
We're in Mount Vernon.
Yeah, this is where, yeah. And so forgetting that I traveled all the way to Salem, Oregon from Iowa, I was like, hey, Mount Vernon. I started talking about Mount Vernon. And we had a disconnect there for a little bit. So we figured out, Washington. He's in Washington. We're in Iowa. Yeah, a little different, but
different Mount Vernon.
Yeah,
still a great name for a town though.
But anyways, but yeah, Mark's well accomplished. PhD over in Bob Jones, and New Testament studies. Mark, is that what it was?
The formal title, in fact, it's right behind my camera up on my wall. For years, I just kept it in a drawer, but finally, when I got ordained, I put my diplomas up. It's New Testament interpretation.
New Testament interpretation. Okay. That's what it is. Well, in very fitting, as we're going to talk a little bit today about such things, and so that's pretty exciting. He's a senior editor for digital content at Word by Word, and that's with Logos, which I love Logos, and I have the software myself, and it really helps me out. So big plug there. Another cool connection I did not know before I knew Mark. I went to a conference as a Christian school teacher, and it was hosted by Bob Jones University, and BJU Press, and they introduced me to this curriculum for high schoolers, and it was the biblical worldview, creation, fall, redemption. And I looked it over, and this is back in 2016. I looked it over, brand new, and I thought, this is good stuff. This is really good stuff. I really like it, and I actually took some things from it. I didn't actually use it as like page by page kind of thing, but I did take some information, and it was impressive. And later I find out that's Mark's there. At least he, not all him, but he played a big role in that. And so I really appreciate that as well. And here's a big one though. He's got this fantastic book called Authorized, the Use and Misuse of the King James Bible. And so Mark and I have some similar background in that, and we both have a love for the King James Version as well as other translations, and just how it has, it has such a wonderful impact throughout history and even in our personal lives as we use it a lot, and then just how it has been misused. And we're going to get into that here very shortly. I don't want to start getting into just right now, but I will say that one of the things I love, he talks about, I think it's chapter 3, and he mentions false friends. And I know that, Mark, you've had some difficulty when you articulate what you mean exactly by false friends, and some give you some pushback because it's English and English, it's not two different languages, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I think the way Mark articulates it, it is actually very fair. I think it's actually extremely accurate, and it's extremely important. And I think it's one of the biggest misuses, the biggest dangers. I'll essentially say, when you think you know what a word means, you're sure of it. You don't have to. It's not like, well, I'm too lazy to get up and look it up, right? You think you know what it means. and you read your common understanding into something that has a much different understanding a few centuries behind. Anyways, I started getting into it, so I wasn't gonna do that yet. So, but anyways, and then I already mentioned the YouTube channel, but make sure you check that out. Mark Ward, this book, Authorized. Let's just get into it. Let's just get into it.
Let's get into it.
Mark, why don't you? I kind of explained it a little bit, but you'll do better anyways. Talk a little bit about false friends, or maybe you want to start with a little bit of why the book even exists. Maybe we should start there.
Yeah, that's probably best.
Ooh, yeah. Well, those are two related and very distinct ideas. Now my mind is exploding with different ways to get into this. But how about I give the little illustration or parallel that was really occurring to me. My church has some missionaries in Greece, and there's a Greek Bible college there. I'm not super familiar with their ministry, to be honest. I don't know all of our missionaries well at all. I haven't been at the church super long. For what it's worth, I was an assistant pastor at another little church that voted to close after COVID, and so I've only been at this church for 2 years. But anyway, I was just reaching out to our missions committee member or chairman, saying, could you connect me with somebody over there? Because I've done some research into the Greek Bible, that is the modern Greek Bible. And I think it would really shock some people out there to realize that the Greek New Testament that, I have actually several copies of up on my shelf, has had to be translated into Greek. Greek translated into Greek. Well, why would that be necessary? Because 2,000 years have elapsed, right? And all languages change over time. And if you've ever read any Wycliffe or even any Tyndale, or if you've ever pulled up the original 1611 King James, you'll recognize immediately our language has changed since then. I think most people know that there are words, therefore, that we know we don't know, like besom, chambering, and emerald. Those are some of my classics that I mentioned. And so when you run across those in the King James, you know to look them up. But false friends are words that you run across that you don't realize you're misunderstanding, because the current senses, in contemporary English still work. But that's not what the King James translators intended. And actually, over and over again, I've run into these things, and I've realized, initially you might be thinking, well, did the King James get it wrong? So, for example, the word translated study, ironically enough, in 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved. A workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. That's a memory verse for practically everybody out there who's used the King James, and it's where we get the word awana, right? The Greek word for study does not mean hit the books or do academic research. It means be diligent. And you might diligently study, but be diligent is a much broader category. So did the King James translators make an error to choose a much more specific word? And initially, it might seem that way until you consider language change, and you go looking at the great Oxford English Dictionary, which I've got right there up on my shelf. It's huge. Oh my goodness, the reactions from Mac OS Sonoma are showing there.
That's pretty cool.
I'm going to turn that off while I'm talking.
Anyway,
the Oxford English Dictionary shows that study used to mean be diligent.
Yeah.
And that just blows people's minds. It's very difficult for people to track with this. We're not used to thinking of our language as a changing thing. In fact, it kind of makes people antsy. Most of the changes that come up on our radars right now have to do with sexual perversion, right? So people start to think, well, language change is bad. No, every single word you use, every single word I'm using is the result of language change at some point.
Gotcha. It makes a lot of sense. So, so the changes that we've had in our language then over the years is just a natural thing. So, bring that up. I mean, this is not an attack against the King James Bible, because at the time that was extremely accurate then, right?
Exactly.
But now the word usage has changed, and so then that's I guess part of what's brought about all these other versions and translations and so forth.
Right. And in fact, this is a defense of the King James, because at point after point, if you go looking up the Hebrew and Greek words that are translated by study or halt or commend in various passages, and people familiar with my work will know the passages I'm bringing up, if you look them up, you'll see, oh my, that word doesn't mean what the King James says it means, until you bring in language change and realize that the word that the King James translators chose was very much appropriate for the English of their day. So
Sure.
they spoke English, we spoke English, but our Englishes are not the same. Just like British English today is not the same as American English. And
Yeah,
even
it's
there are
not even
regional
close.
Englishes within
Yep.
America and Kenya and India, and the kinds of differences that occur between Indian English. I was just over there 1 year ago with my church leadership, and my wife got to come for a ministry trip. It was really awesome. It was just an amazing country. Their English differs from our English in some of the same kinds of ways that Elizabethan English differs from contemporary English. And the whole point here is just to have people understand their Bibles. So if you can watch all my stuff, you can read my book, my upcoming book, Lord willing, KJV Words You Don't Know, You Don't Know.
Mm.
I have a
Yeah,
contract
that'd be
for it.
good.
I'm trying to finish it up soon. You can read those books and go through my materials and read your King James with better understanding.
Well, real quick, the one resource I neglected to mention is your parallel Bible that you have, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
And it's the kjvparallelbible.org. You can go there. And what's really cool about it, it's so simple. It's so easy to use.
Yeah.
And you just literally, you have the Textus Receptus in English, translation into English. And then you have the critical text translation in English kind of thing. And it goes right, side by side. And it even highlights the differences. You don't have to like search and search. It highlights them. And it goes through. And I think one of the cool things about it is that you'll see just how similar the overwhelming majority is, and the differences are things that don't change meaning at all. There are some places where there is a change of meaning. One thing I thought, I don't know if I should bring this up as a topic or not, but I know I've talked about it before with some, just casually with some people, but one of the big changes would be like a Revelation 22 in the back there. And Mark, I'm sure you're probably at least casually familiar, but toward the end there in verse 19, the difference of book of life and tree of life, and that's kind of an interesting thing. And so there you'd have a big divergence, and I don't know how much you want to get into that. It's probably might be a longer explanation to explain how we arrived to those two different things. But it is just to show that there is, if you look through any passage, you're most likely not going to see a big change. But once in a while there is.
I think before we get too far into this topic, maybe Mark can just explain quickly to all of our listeners what's the different what is the TR and what is the critical text.
Okay. Yeah.
Not everybody even knows what in the world we're talking about now.
Sure.
That's fair. Yeah.
Well, you guys are the hosts, so I'm at your mercy. You tell me what I need to talk about because I want to serve your audience. However,
go ahead.
Let me preface it because I can answer this question. I mean, I could answer at great length, way more than anybody would want to know.
That's what I love about you.
But I'd like to make first an attempt to deflect, because this is very complex stuff, right? What the history of the Greek New Testament manuscripts that the Lord has preserved for us down through the centuries, what they tell us and how to weigh the usually minor differences among them, like the wise men came to see baby Jesus versus the wise men came to find baby Jesus. I think it's Matthew 2:10 or 2:12. I can't remember now, 2:11. That's not a big difference. There's no difference in meaning. How do we weigh those things? Why do those differences in the manuscripts occur? Why did the Lord let it occur? These are very complex matters because in order to really understand them, I mean, I often feel awkward saying this, but there's just no way around it. You have to be able to read Greek. You have to be able to look at them yourself. And the truth is that goes for Hebrew as well. It's a different situation because the Jews had, custody of the Hebrew Bible for so many centuries and were very careful with it, of course, as the Dead Sea Scrolls have shown. But even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which come from before Christ or around the time of Christ, there are minor differences between the great Isaiah scroll that I've seen in Jerusalem and the Masoretic version of the Hebrew. So what do we do with all these? What I want to say is, even if your conscience is beholden to the Textus Receptus, which in general is the set of Greek New Testament editions that underlie the King James Version that I've got here. You don't have to get this all figured out, these complexities. You don't have to learn Greek. You can use the Textus Receptus based translations that have been made into fully intelligible contemporary English. So there are effectively no dead words and false friends. The New King James and the Modern English Version are probably the two most commonly used and well known. You know, the New King James right at the top there, that are based on the Textus Receptus, same as the King James. So I usually try not to even talk about this topic because
Okay.
I find that debates about it get bogged down very quickly when the participants think that they're arguing about Greek, but they actually can't read Greek. And here again, I feel, awkward saying this, but I think this ought to be straightforwardly obvious. If you can't read ancient Chinese, then you cannot have an intelligent debate about which manuscripts of Confucius are more likely to be original, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what
right.
Yeah,
what
I
I
agree.
found would often happen, and I'll stop here, and then you can press me on with more of these topics if you want. But what I found would often happen is I'm not actually having an argument about the Greek New Testament. I'm having an argument with a brother in Christ that I love, with whom I'd rather not have division. I'm having an argument about which authorities we should trust. And I hate to say ever, don't trust your pastor. My goodness, I just feel terribly awkward saying that. I would not want to say that. I if I'm forced to tell someone your pastor is wrong about something, I want to be able to point to Bible and to something that's accessible to them. So that's why I talk about English. If someone is saying the King James Version is the only translation that anybody who speaks English should use, then I want to say, isn't it awkward for this view? Isn't it difficult for this view? That English has changed enough now that up on my channel, I'm up around, I think I just filmed false friend number 83. These are, how can you possibly keep track of all these words that you think you know, but actually you don't know them because English has changed over time? Maybe at least it's time to accept a revision of the King James Version. I would much rather talk about that because 1 Corinthians 14 says edification requires intelligibility. It says clearly that you need to use words people can understand or they're not going to be edified. Whereas the Bible, in my estimation, nowhere says, it tells me how to adjudicate differences among manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible or of the Greek New Testament. So I want to stick with what the Bible says and allow liberty where the Bible has not, God through scripture has not chosen to speak with specificity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
I think I think the primary, I haven't read the entirety of your book. I'll admit that.
It's okay.
But I will. But what I gather from the book, in my opinion, I think false friends is the nail in the coffin. I think that's the number one argument for getting that revision, getting just awareness, because we don't want to misuse. We don't want to misuse the translation. That's the idea. I think another one, maybe, so we'll sidestep. We mentioned some things, and I like your approach to setting the foundation first. I'm a person that has familiar with the Greek language, Koine anyway, the New Testament Greek, and so
Not me.
So I can appreciate what you're saying about the necessities there. And just an encouragement for the listeners, I would say, what I like to say is, you don't have to study the original languages to know the Word of God,
Right.
but it makes it a lot easier. I think you have to do a lot more work when you don't know the original languages, and you sometimes you have less confidence in a choice when you don't know the original languages, and so I just think it's better. It's better, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. You're going to have all your doctrines. You're going to know how to please Christ day to day. So that's the bigger issues are okay. And then you can just let nerdy guys like us discuss things and figure out who's right.
And that means you're going to have to trust somebody. You're going to have to trust somebody to translate for you. How many people in the world are really that good at biblical Hebrew and Koine Greek? I mean, there are some who can translate the entire Bible and just read it straight from the original Hebrew and New Testament Greek. Even most biblical scholars, they specialize in either Greek or Hebrew, and they tend to have to trust other people to translate the other testament for them.
Yep.
Like, I can check up on the translations of the Old Testament that I read, but at some level, because my Greek is better than my Hebrew, I am leaving it up to scholars that I have to trust. And I trust the King James translators. Ironically, sadly to me, a lot of people say when I bring up these archaisms that I'm bashing the King James and I'm attacking it. Absolutely not. Any more than I would be bashing Wycliffe, who was the morning star of the Reformation,
Yep.
to point out that we just don't speak that way anymore. It's not an attack. But I think that if you can recognize you're going to have to trust somebody, and a lot of the King James only world, they only want to trust the King James translators. And I say, well, we've got some options here, right? You can it's possible to trust people that are untrustworthy. I mean, and I think there are some liberal translations out there or Catholic translations that I'm not going to trust. But I think you're overreacting to say, well, we should only trust this particular set of Anglican translators from the early 17th century. I think the Lord has continued to give teachers to his church, as Ephesians 4 says. And I know personally quite a number now of the modern English Bible translators, and I think they are worthy of your trust. And a small follow-up, I talk about Greek and Hebrew all the time on the Logos blog and in my YouTube work for them and on my personal channel. And I want to echo what you said, that whereas I said for textual critical purposes, you need to know Greek and Hebrew, or it's really impossible to have an intelligent discussion. I do not say that about all of the things that the Bible does for us: doctrine, reproof, correction, instruction, and righteousness. You can absolutely get all of those things just through translation, because as the King James translators said in their amazing preface, even the meanest translation of the Word of God contains is the Word of God. And the King James is not the meanest translation. It's an excellent translation. The ESV is a good translation. There's lots of other good translations. You can know God. You don't have to know Greek and Hebrew to please God and have good doctrine.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I've been scouring your YouTube channel. I tell you, that's a deep, dark hole that some of us could really get into.
I highly recommend
oh
everyone.
My goodness, there's some really good stuff on there.
Go there. Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I never get the feeling that you're attacking anything. You're explaining stuff and
I appreciate
helping me understand. So I just want to reiterate what you said. Like, you're not trying to attack. And I didn't get that impression at all. So one of the videos I came across, I was looking at some more information just on your book, Authorized, and it's the top 5 things we lose as the King James goes away. And I was watching that actually again this morning, kind of prepping for this, and I think those are some things that we need to consider just as Christians, because there are certain things. So I grew up reading the King James Bible. I wasn't in a King James only church or anything. It's just when I was a kid, my parents got saved. Everybody told us, "Hey, the King James is the most accurate Bible." It's like, you got that, the NIV, and we were told, "Yeah, read the King James." So I did. Like, that's what I grew up reading. I memorized all my verses in it growing up. I was never a King James only, but I would definitely say I was a King James preferred, at least because that's what I read. And it, I didn't have. I was also one of those people. So when I came across the word I didn't understand, I looked it up. And maybe that's just part of my upbringing. But I remember when I was a kid, we homeschool, and every time I asked my mom, "Hey, what's this word mean?" "Look it up." She we had dictionary, we go get it out and we look it up and we look and I suppose a lot of people don't necessarily do that because it takes time and effort. And if you're just reading, sometimes it can bog you down and slow you down. But either way, the King James is fading away, and more translations are getting used, and most churches that around here anyway, everyone's going to ESV for their translation in their churches.
Like I got here.
Yeah. And I personally mostly use the New King James and the NASB. for most of my own just reading and Bible study, but I have bookshelves full of, different versions and Bibles and different things. Anyway, the things that we lose as the King James goes away, and I think these are just really good points. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that or not. And I think
Sure.
that's beneficial for us to kind of think through, like what we are missing by not having this universal translation we all use.
Right. Well, I grew up on the King James as well. My parents were saved as young adults. My mom was saved in the mid 70s at a Josh McDowell, evangelistic apologetics
Sure.
event. And my father was saved after coming into a time of personal trial as an 18-year-old at the University of Virginia. He'd grown up in a very liberal church that, left him with the thinnest possible gruel of Christianity,
Sure.
but left him a Bible. So he pulled out his Bible, figuring, okay, that's where I'll get some answers. And he repented of his sins and trusted Christ, and then ran into my mom in an elevator while trying to
Nice.
deliver class notes to some other cute girl in his class. And the rest is history. And here I am. And my
Nice.
mom helped my dad get into church. And so my parents faithfully raised me as a Christian, and actually their anniversary was yesterday as we record this,
Oh,
and I was
cool.
talking with them, and they said, "What has kept us together? Well, it's our faith in Christ." So I have a heritage I'm grateful for. And what do you do when you have a heritage that you're grateful for? You hold on to as much of it as you can, right? Do
Sure.
I
Yeah.
believe
Right.
everything that my parents said to me when I was a kid? Well, no, I have changed my mind on some things. Am I 98% of the way there? Yeah, I would say that I am. And my bent as a conservative is to hold on to as much good as I possibly can from previous generations. And that's one of the values that we lose as we move on from the King James Version and move to modern translations. There is a connection with the past that we are severing. And that has a lot of practical ramifications where hymnody, like "Here I raise mine Ebenezer," the word mine causes a little bit of a problem. And Ebenezer, you know what? I was wondering actually, does the King James use the word Ebenezer? Now I'm going to have to look this one up in Logos Bible software. It doesn't. Ah, ha, ha, I used a bad example, but it's that kind of thing, right? It's it does. It has a hyphen in it. That's why I didn't find it the first time, but I turned on Logos fuzzy search and found it. So Samuel took a stone, set it between Mizpah and Shen, and
Yep.
called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, "Hitherto hath the Lord helped us." Okay. I don't think, I'm going to just check this while I'm standing here. That's 1 Samuel 7:12.
Funny
I
story,
doubt.
quick.
Yeah.
Speaking of Ebenezer, so
Uh-huh.
when we first started camp, Solid Rock Christian Camp, we thought about getting a giant boulder to put at camp and name it Ebenezer because of
That's
that
great.
passage. So when you said Ebenezer, I know what that means.
You
We
know,
came
I
across that
picked,
once and we're like, hey, we should do that, but then we never did because big rocks are hard to move.
yeah, I have discovered that as well. I picked this one out of the air. I haven't used this example before, but I've learned to check up on things. Actually, all the modern translations pretty much do use Ebenezer in this case. So that was a bad example. But there are places where the
Yeah.
King James uses words that, modern translations don't use because those words no longer are part of our English or mean something different. And they pop up in our hymnody or in,
Right.
classic sermon illustrations, whatever.
Yeah.
And we lose that understanding, we lose that connection. Um, those are valuable things that I would not want to lose if I didn't have to. But here's what I always say. We have to use just weights, right? When we come to that scale, we have
Yeah.
to ask not only how much does it weigh that we get to use the same English translation that our grandparents and great grandparents did. I mean, that weighs something. It certainly does for me. But we also have to weigh how much does it weigh to read the Bible in our own English? I think that weighs
Yeah.
more, right? Those aren't the only things that I weigh, but those are some of the big things that I weigh. So even though we're losing things of value, and I detail some of these things in the book Authorized in the first chapter, I think what we're gaining by tending to move to modern translations weighs more because I think the one thing that weighs the most is intelligible English that therefore
Sure.
edifies people. So it's good to look things up in your Bible. You're never going to get a good Bible translation where you don't have to look anything up. There's going to be obscure plants like mandrakes and obscure places like the Negev and obscure people like Hatzalalel Poni that you're going to have to look up if you want to study. Those are all real examples.
I like it. You just rip them off the top of your head.
But to lay the burden on a 10-year-old homeschool kid, you have to look up the word besom when you can just say broom. It's really okay. I think that's good, right? You don't want to lay an unnecessary burden on the many children and drug addicts and prisoners and regular middle-class church-going people, let's be frank, who have difficulty speaking in older English and reading it. That's what's more important, what weighs more to me.
Yeah, that goes into the other thing I wanted to actually mention, and I don't want to take too much of your time here, but I am so fascinated in all these things. I love it. But I think I can't remember if it's maybe it's chapter 4 or 5, something like that. You talk about the readability of the King James. I've always heard these things, and I never even thought about the metrics they use to get there. Like
to determine, right?
What do you do? And so now I've read a little bit and from you, and so I'd like you to touch on that if you could, and just to say what they use to come up with that. The 5th, 6th grade, whatever it is, readability level, and then what all goes into it. Basically, is what I'd like to know.
Yes, I think the most common label that I hear is that the King James is at a 5th grade reading level. And I remember when I was sitting down to write that chapter of Authorized, I was actually writing it as a blog post on my blog. And this is now, boy, 10 years ago, probably. And I worked for BJU Press at the time. And I kind of figured that the elementary authors who were just sitting across the aisle from me, because I was in the secondary, high school area, I figured they would know about these readability tests. So I went over and asked the top elementary author, Dottie, how do they determine these numbers? You guys do this sort of thing for the graded readers that you have. And nobody over there in the elementary authors that I talked to knew exactly how it happened. And I remember sitting at my desk thinking, okay, it falls to me to figure this out. Little did I know, it's very, very simple. In fact, so simple, it's kind of embarrassing. Basically, it boils down to they use math to count words in a sentence, how long are the sentences, and to count syllables in the words, how long are the words. And they say, as a rough and ready measure, shorter sentences and shorter words are easier, longer sentences and longer words are harder. That is it. The computer is not reading, it's counting. So I started to realize if you replace every other syllable with bub and nub, nonsense syllables, you'll still get the 5th grade reading level. If you stick Swedish in there, or half Swedish and half King James, then, and as long as you have the same number of syllables in each word and the same length of sentences, you'll get the same readability level. On a more concrete level here, think about the word call, C-A-U-L. Do any of you know what that means? I'm putting you on the spot here. It's a King James word, C-A-U-L.
C-A-U-L?
Does that mean to pull out from something or not?
It's a noun. It's actually the lobe of fat on meat, and it's talked about in some some of those settings.
I wasn't gonna guess that.
Nah, I wasn't.
And how many, I didn't know it either. Okay. Frequently I think people think that I'm trying to put myself up as smarter than they are because I can understand the King James words. Actually, over and over and over again, what I'm saying is I did not know this word myself. I did not realize I was misunderstanding it in the case of false friends. And in the case of dead words like call, I didn't know it. Well, how many syllables does call have? 1. How many letters does it have? 4. The call, C-A-U-L, and call, C-A-L-L, they have the exact same contribution to a readability score. But one is a word we don't know, and one is a word that we use every day. So when you try to apply these readability tests, like the Flesch-Kincaid analysis, to the King James, you're leaving out entirely the most important aspect of what ought to be tested, and that is the timeline. The readability tests cannot account for spelling changes over time, word meaning changes over time. The computer has utterly no idea that it's even reading a language. All it knows is it's counting stuff. So the readability analyses have effectively no bearing on the debate here. And I would like to see the use of that particular meme decreasing over time because of my work, because there's a lot of my work that I think people could dispute. Okay, even I admit it. But when it comes to this, I feel I was pretty definitive. The readability analyses ought to not be used in this debate whatsoever.
Yeah,
Who's the best
sure.
judge of how hard something is to read? It's readers. It's not computers.
Yeah, it's the person reading it. Exactly.
Yeah, maybe they can develop, an AI system eventually that can do a good job, much better job anyways. But yeah, that's
Maybe.
stuff they've been using. I'll say real quick for the listeners' sake, with about Mark putting himself on a pedestal, being smarter. What I know about Mark, very meek, humble guy, but he is definitely smarter than we are. So
Yeah.
just so you know out there.
Yeah.
I'm going for more entertaining. That's what I at least maybe I can, but yeah, no, I really appreciate you, Mark. Thanks.
So I think that the natural question that our listeners are going to have now is then, all right, so what Bible version should I use? Like, and I know you may not with like, oh yeah, use this one, right? That's not necessarily, but like if you gave us like a top 3, hey, as far as I know, these are the most accurate and most modern English at the same time. We're like, hey, these are very usable translations. Do you have kind of that?
So I wrote an article that ended up being a chapter in the book Authorized, and that was one of our most popular articles at the Logos blog. Not because my article was so great, but because people are searching for this online. In fact, I was just looking at the stats for this this search yesterday. The best Bible translation. People are constantly asking this.
Yeah.
So my title my title of the article was "Which Bible translation is best?" All the good ones. That's the answer that I consistently give. Now, I'm an evangelical Christian. I believe the gospel. I believe in the Bible's inspiration, authority, and inerrancy, and its necessity and sufficiency, all the classic doctrines of bibliology in lowercase o, orthodoxy, going way back into the early church. And of course, I think to Paul and Jesus and even beyond. I think I have the standard evangelical view. And therefore, I trust evangelicals to translate the Bible for me. Are they all perfect? No. Do they ever make mistakes? Yes. In fact, some of them have acknowledged these, like the word sinful nature in the NIV 1984, which they don't use anymore in the NIV 2011. But if you look at my Logos shelf, you can't see it on here because I've sold my paper commentaries, but you'll see tons of commentaries by people like Doug Moo on Romans. He happens to be the top commentator on Romans, widely regarded as such. His first edition came out in 1996, and the second edition of it came out just a couple of years ago, like maybe 2016, something like that. Anyway, he's the head of the Committee on Bible Translation for the NIV. The top biblical scholars that have done the most to serve the church and to help the church, protect itself against doctrinal error outside, trying to come in. Often they are the ones who are working on these translations. So in general, I trust the evangelical translations. In general, I do tend to kind of want to start with the more literal translations. And for many years, I always thought, well, I'm going to have to decide, am I more of a literal translation guy or a dynamic translation guy? And then I suddenly realized nobody's holding a gun to my head and saying, you have to use only one kind. Like, why can't I use both? So I do. I use both all the time. I tend to use the more literal ones like the ESV and the NASB and the New King James. I tend to use that as a baseline. And then the CSB and NIV and even the NET, which I usually use for its notes and not for its translation. But when I do check the translation, those and the New Living Translation, they tend to be more dynamic, more functional. The CSB actually is a really nice middle ground, which I've been recommending a lot recently. That's what I tend to talk about. I don't give people the simple answer they want often because I want to help them understand. If you bring some understanding of why these translations differ and what their philosophies were and kind of where they leaned, nobody's totally not literal or totally literal. You can't do either one. They just tend to lean one way or the other. if you bring some understanding of that into your reading of multiple Bible translations, then you're equipped to understand much better why they differ, and therefore equipped to get the benefit of checking multiple Bible translations, which is what I want, because that's what brings understanding, I find. And that's my goal here. I just want myself to understand God's word, and I want others to do so as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. All right. So then the next question that comes to mind, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, I don't know. Are there any translations that, like, you know what, stay away from these, they're just not good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there are. Most people expect me to start with the message. I won't start there, because as long as you understand what a paraphrase is,
Sure.
I think the message can bring some value.
Okay.
As long as you know that he's not saying that Psalm 1 actually contains in Hebrew the words, smart mouth college, then I think you can do okay reading a paraphrase like that. Do I read it much? No. Have I read through the entire thing? I haven't. But I've done some checking in the message and found places where there was real insight. And
Sure.
I reject much of what was distinctive about Eugene Peterson's theology. I read a biography of him in the last 2 years, and I was actually very much put off, to be honest. I came with an open heart, and I came away very disappointed in him, actually at multiple levels. But I also read his book, Eat This Book, about the Bible and about Bible translation. And it was frankly excellent. He did know what he was doing. He read the Greek and Hebrew to produce this. There's some value there. What I would stay away from is the Passion Translation. There's no other word for it. It's a crackpot translation. Brian Simmons is an extremist Pentecostal who says that the Holy Spirit touched his forehead and caused a download of special information that others don't have. He was told by the Spirit the secrets of Hebrew homonymy, which is frankly silly. I don't see any reason to read the Passion Translation. Although I have a good friend that I respect who says that she's a long-term educator, decades in this ministry. She found value in it. I hesitate to burn any books because it just makes people want to read them. But if I get some time to explain to people what I'm after, the Passion Translation is one I'd warn them against. And I've got more. I did a series on sectarian translations, like the New World Translation from the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Sure.
and a couple others, and crackpot translations. I did some big videos on my channel about those categories. So I definitely do warn people away from some.
So if people want to get more info on that, they can always check out your YouTube channel then, and where you dig in a lot deeper. No, that's perfect.
Be careful. It's a rabbit hole that you can fall into and not see your wife for about 3 months.
Yeah. It can be. And, and if you're focused on what to avoid, maybe you're focused on the wrong things anyway, but at the same time, it's good to be educated and to know like what things are good and what things you should stay away from and things. So, and certain people have interest in that and some don't. I like details and I like rabbit holes. So,
good.
I have a feeling
you'll love my channel. It's one big rabbit hole.
I may get stuck on your channel from time to time. So I have to take it in small doses or I may get in trouble.
Right. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time. I don't want to take too much. I feel like I could just, abuse you and take hours with you, but I won't do that. And so I just want to point people to your YouTube channel, Mark Ward. Just go check that out. It's very profitable, as we've already said. Also, his book, Authorized, the Use and Misuse of the King James translation there. And then there's another book coming. I would say probably go run and check that out when it's available. Stay up to date with them. Are you still active with you're still active with the blog, right?
On my blog, it's not very active. I'll stick little book reviews up there every once in a while, but really all of my extracurricular energies pretty much are going into my YouTube channel and into articles for other publications and into the occasional book.
Okay. And then where can we get your book at? What's the best place to buy it at?
Anywhere that nerdy books by redheaded authors are sold, you can get it. Yeah.
And now you're
on my
Audible.
website. Audible. I did the recording for Authorized. It's on Logos, both as a ebook and as a audiobook. It's on Audible. It's on Kindle. You can buy it in paper from Amazon or from lexandpress.com. I doubt it's in any bookstores out there except for maybe Christian college bookstores here and there. But yeah, anywhere books are sold.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, in that KJV parallelbible.org. That was the other one I was.
Yeah.
I knew there was another one. That was the other one that's worth checking out. It's worth your time. It's fascinating. Another little rabbit hole. You just kind of keep. You'll keep going.
Yeah.
And I love how it's made.
Yeah,
I mean, you got the differences highlighted, so I can just scroll right through, and I mean, I don't have to know what I'm looking for. I can just see it. That's great.
I'd really love for many, many more people to be using that. It took me several years with the help of multiple volunteers to get that done. It's quite a lot of work. It's actually coming into Logos Bible Software. It might possibly be coming into print as well in 2024, 2025. But people have been saying for quite a long time that the Textus Receptus and the critical text are radically different, completely different. And those are direct quotes from leaders in this debate. But actually, I don't think that's the case. I think that the similarities far outweigh the differences. And what I found was when I put this project together, I could not get anyone who was telling me that the differences are radical. I could not get them interested in helping me produce this website, which is just the facts. I am just presenting, okay, what are the differences? I found that very interesting and kind of sad, actually. I don't want to see God's people divided over something that God doesn't say or that isn't true. And in this case, I think saying that the critical text and the Textus Receptus are radically different is not true. And you can see it for yourself in English at kjvparallelbible.org.
Yeah, and literally, I mean, it's just a parallel. Like there's nothing else there. Like it just is a study tool. It is just the facts. When you say that, like that's what's there. So if there's differences, they're on there, but they're so far I haven't read through the whole thing, but there's not many that would be significant in any way. So
I'll add because that, Mark, obviously, if you go through it, obviously there's a lot of work put into this website. And so if you go there, because maybe your appetite's not wet enough yet, but there is, at the top, there's these little, tabs you can click on. So, about, it explains, and it's not long, real easy read, just a few paragraphs, and it just tells you like the kind of the background of it all. And then you have a couple others that are really interesting. The TR quiz, which text is the TR? And so you get to pick as side by side, the one on the left, one on the right. You go through this kind of a thing, and then there's another tab, which TR. So that, if you're not familiar, there has been more than one thing called the Textus Receptus,
right?
And actually, a couple dozen, a little more than a couple dozen. And so it's just would be fascinating, I think, for a lot of people to expose themselves to these things and understand that they might not be aware of the whole argument.
It's complex.
Yes, it is big, because when you go there, you're gonna think, okay, now I'm gonna know everything, and then you're gonna realize, oh, there's more to learn.
There's a lot more out there.
It's always how it goes.
This is a great tool. So everybody check out Mark's YouTube channel. Man, there's a lot of good stuff on there. Check out his website, and and then KJV parallelbible.org. There is some good stuff there. So Mark, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on. I think it's probably early morning over there, so thank you for.
Yes, I woke up early for you, but it was well worth it. And thank you for your kindness and generosity, guys.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, Mark.